everyone. Thanks for joining us for another edition of the Texas Insider TV show, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. I'm Jim Cardle. Well, we're halfway through the Texas legislative session. Democrat presidential candidates are continuing to declare and expand their field on almost a weekly basis. And the Texas and U.S. economies continue to grow and show strength across the board. What's going to be the future of the near-term and long-term economic outlook? And is the socialism message coming out of the Democrat Party impacting the nation's economy? Marc Flaster's the chairman of the Texas Insider Economic Council, and we're pleased to visit with Marc Flaster today on Texas Insider TV. Well, Marc Flaster, chairman of the Texas Insider Economic Council, we appreciate you coming in today and giving us an update on what's going on economically.
Oh, it's always my pleasure to be here. Just getting to Austin is the problem.
we got traffic and population growth, no doubt. But let's just jump right in. I know you got a plane to catch. And interestingly enough, today we've scheduled this visit. You happen to come in, and we've talked about interest rates before. The Federal Reserve's interest rate setting committee happens to be meeting today. Some economists have said that the Federal Reserve is in fact, and their outlook of raising interest rates is in fact the greatest threat to maintaining the current expansion. Tell us what you're expecting with the Federal Reserve Interest Rate Committee today, and interest rates maybe the rest of the year if you can.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to take a very different tack than most people have enjoyed or find of interest. And so if this is not of interest, then I ask you to step away and you'll do something else.
Okay.
Because in my opinion, the Fed is irrelevant.
Really?
And it's been irrelevant for a lot of years. The only time they had any real impact was when Bernanke and company went and collapsed interest rates by building this big $4.3 trillion portfolio.
And that was almost 6 or 8 years ago,
yes,
correct?
Before
a
the
while
Obama
ago.
administration came in. And the important thing about the interest rates is that interest rates do not dominate the economy, and they never have. And the Fed had some influence on the borrowing activity and cost of the government, but they did not initiate the return of the economy and after it went through a downturn, but they were one ingredient. And so what's happened here is that the markets and your prognosticators have all focused their attention that the Fed is making constraining or enlarging the highway that is going to lead to growth. And that's not, they're just one ingredient. They're very small, in fact. And the movement of interest rates, as you can see what's happened here, is that last year versus this year, the 10-year Treasury is down 100 basis points from a 360 to 260, so 258 or 9 this morning, and yet mortgage activity has declined. Well, if interest rates are so important to housing, how come mortgage rates have not influenced more housing?
Does that beg the question that it's maybe the Trump tax cuts, less regulation?
No, it tells you that the cost of housing has gone up. And one of the reasons why the cost of housing has gone up is, you mentioned somebody that everyone was heralding is helping the economy. In some ways he is, in other ways he's not. He went to Canada and put a tariff on wood, and so soft lumber houses are built with lumber. And so the cost of acquisition of land, the cost of building the house has gone up. And the general population, in terms of their revenue from work and the like, and what they earn and what they have, can't afford to have a house, to pay for a house. We're talking in general. So where's the construction? The construction is rentals.
Really?
And so what you see happening here in Austin or in Houston or in New York City is high-rise buildings that are rentals.
Interesting.
And because you can rent, and people have the money to pay a monthly rent, but don't have the capital to put down for a full home or a condominium.
And you've been one who has been at the forefront or has long talked about how this millennial generation that's coming forward is more about experiences than, say, long-term job involvement or settling down to buy a house. They are into more of the
a couple
rental
things.
type economy.
Yes, they're rental. They move a lot. They don't want to. They're getting married later. They're having children later. They're having fewer children. Today, the average community has more pets in their apartments than they have children.
Oh, for Pete's sakes.
Okay, how about that? And that's a big change in the last 20 years.
Okay, folks, I want to thank you again for joining us for this edition of the Texas Insider TV show, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. We're visiting with Texas Insider's chairman of the Economic Council for Texas Insider, Marc Flaster. Marc, let me transition a little bit because we're talking about interest rates and its influence, but how about the job market? Here in the last quarter or so, we've seen strong, I think about 185,000 jobs per month. Interest rates, you're saying, are not as important as they used to be, or not as important. What do you see for the overall economic forecast in terms of the continuing job growth, perhaps?
Let's just put a couple of numbers down.
Okay.
One, we'll start off, we're not in a recession, we're not having a recession.
Okay.
Secondly, when we did have one, and we did have a reversal in the economy itself, it came from restraint it came from overabundance of lending without restraint. That was, we'll say, somewhat solved by the Obama administration, but going too far and putting so many constraints on lending that the economy couldn't grow. So when the new administration came in under Trump, and he put several things in place, one of the things he was able to do is to detune, detox, de-emphasize, and in some cases remove some of the constraints and restraints that were put on the economy by the Democratic, let's say, reaction to what had happened during that period. Okay.
So instead of having restrictions governing the amount of growth, we've loosened and
well, in terms
ability.
of access, in order to have growth, you have to have credit, and so you need access to credit.
Okay, there's number one.
So what Trump did is reverse a lot of the constraints on credit and the oversight that was put on the banks, so they couldn't lend. So the banks are free to lend, and the Fed has raised their target rate and 100 basis points this past year, and in that period of time, the banks therefore managed their interest rates on their loans to the cost of funding. So funding went up, their interest rates went up, or I'd say the Fed's index went up, so their rate was tied to that, and so they earned more money. Then add to that the part of the tax bill was to drop the tax rate for corporations by 40%, not 1%, not 5%. 40%. Now, I beg you, please, you got to be able to make money if your tax rate went down 40%. So we have a stock market that went off to the moon when all these companies reported, believe it or not, they reported better earnings.
Based on the tax cuts, not on profits.
Who said that?
Yes.
No,
Okay.
absolutely not. They had better earnings.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, and all the analysts, were very carefully scribbling down how the bank reported this earnings this quarter, and the quarter before, when rates were higher, okay, they reported lower earnings. But they didn't say it was a tax rate. They said the company did better. Didn't do any better. So this is the first year that we're going to compare, or the new year that we're going to compare the same companies under the same tax rate. The tax rate's now 21%, and last year in 18 it was also 21%, but in 17 it was 35%. So now we're going to have a lot of discussion of whether companies are still making money.
Huge difference.
So big difference, and the stock market is rising. Okay, and it's continued to be energized, but it seems to be stalled around the same. It's already had its big push.
Okay.
So as far as looking forward for stocks, we're more looking forward towards amalgamation of companies becoming more efficient. We're looking at companies entering new fields. We're looking at competition that's coming from abroad, and that's been somewhat stymied by the tariff wars. But when that gets out of the way, international trade will return to be a very important part of this economy, which relates to your question about unemployment, because We don't manufacture anything here anymore. We import most of what we used to manufacture, and so those jobs have become less important. I think 14% of the labor force is now in manufacturing, so those jobs have become much less important to the economy. What's important to the economy are service jobs, okay? And service jobs are at the low end,
Okay.
okay? And that's where the problem is finding workers, because we're now constraining the immigration of people who would take those jobs, and we're holding those people back. And those people want to be here. They want to be in our country, and they want to live, whatever. But they're also the people who would take those jobs. So the people that, so the report of unemployment, a narrow unemployment index of
3.8, yeah,
3.8%.
9.4.
That represents those that are in the labor force who are here, have joined in a place they can be counted. There's a whole schism of people who are not counted labor force because they're either part-time, okay, they're on some public assistance, but they also move in and out as their needs require, and or they just are not being counted because the jobs that they have are not in that framework. So I'd say the unemployment number is basically it's not. I don't think it's ever been accurate, but it's less now.
How about, if I can pivot a little bit, I know you've been traveling here the last couple days, as you do when you come to Texas. You've been to a couple different major cities. What are you seeing? Give us an update on your feel for the Texas economy. Oil prices are stabilizing a bit in the high 50s to 60s. Is Texas' economy still going to have a positive outlook?
On the contrary, as I mentioned, it's just that we walked in and talked briefly about today's newspaper. There's an article about the growth of businesses in San Francisco, and the fact that San Francisco is so expensive to live in that it's a place where it appears that entrepreneurs or people who have ideas go to source their ideas and find it's a incubator of new companies, but they can't stay there. As soon as they feel that they have some traction, they're leaving. 30% of them are coming to Texas.
Really?
Now, Texas, I can tell you this, as my travels, is booming, absolutely booming, and it's not oil related. Houston is phenomenal. Dallas-Fort Worth has already been on a roll for a while, and it's continued to expand. This is moving out. The ship channel is
down in Houston and Corpus Christi, I should add.
Corpus Christi area. The U.S. is now the largest exporter of oil and energy. Natural gas is becoming liquefied natural gas, becoming a very big resource to replace fossil fuels. And when we talk fossil fuels, we're not talking oil, we're talking coal, which everyone does agree is dirty.
Dirty.
Okay. But Europe relies on coal. Okay? A lot of the world relies on coal, and it is the largest resource for energy in the world. And natural gas is the first replacement. And so we are all these oil. Louisiana Oil Port was built to be an oil import place. It's now an export place. It's being converted to a natural gas, a liquefied natural gas LNG port to export natural gas.
Okay, folks, we're visiting with Texas Insider's chairman of our Economic Council, Marc Flaster. I got one final question, Marc, because you and I have talked off camera before with your being based in New York City. This recent decision by Amazon, there was a lot of focus about Amazon's headquarters locating outside of Washington, D.C. and outside of downtown New York City, I believe in Queens. And then along comes Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, gins up her socialist, anti-corporate welfare machine, and the next thing you know, Amazon's saying it's not going to locate in New York City. What's the reaction you're hearing from businesses? Do they care? Do they watch this type of thing? What's the reaction and impression about this anti-jobs movement or anti-capitalism movement?
That's a hard question. You ask me too many things. I would say the simple answer is that it was a political decision by the mayor based on the fact that the energy for advertising and exposure of a minority opinion made him feel that his voters, his voting support was against this move. And so therefore he then took what he felt was the right decision to support his position.
Okay.
Did anyone care? In the end, he's got so many positions, he's moving around like crazy. The city is so diverse and there's so much going on. It's not like some big company moved to a small town here in Texas, like Schertz or Cibolo or something like that. There were some arguments here that did make sense if you read further into it. One was the average salary that Amazon was going to employ was over $100,000. The area that they were going to move into, the average income may not have been much above the poverty level.
Really?
And a lot of people have public assistance. So there were not jobs for those people immediately by Amazon. Maybe
as opposed to bringing in new employees,
yes,
higher
but they
skilled.
More people to do the laundry, more people at the bar, more people to clean the apartments or do babysitting or whatever. But it wasn't at 100,000 or higher level. Okay? The governor now of the state has come back and said, Cuomo has said, well, maybe that wasn't the right decision. I'm going to go talk to those guys and say, New York, has a place for you. Okay, may not be as large as it was, but the Amazon's moved on. They've gone someplace else.
So are you saying? I think I hear you saying that the squeaky wheel got the grease, but it was an outside message for the actual crowd it was representing.
No,
correct?
It's not it wasn't something that says, to push you away. And, you have a whole, after the midterm elections, you now have 16 or 17 by last count. You got Biden is just about, he's almost tripped over his own tongue to announce his candidacy to be, a potential candidacy to be
the Democrat nominee.
Democrat nominee. And so you have so many diverse opinions now occupying the front page of the paper about what we could be doing, what we should be doing, all searching for votes. Elizabeth Warren this morning, what did she say? That we should get rid of the Electoral College. Somebody else the other day said that we should lower the voting age to 16.
Yes.
Okay. No, heaven forbid. But there's a lot of messages that are being thrown out. And so this goes back to our economy, that the president is patting himself on the back, that the economy grew at 3% for last year. It will not grow at that speed this year, or that rate. It will be closer to 2%, and some of it has to do with the things that he did, the damage he put in force with the temporary shutdown of the government and the furloughs, but other things have had influence. The fact that you now have a Democratic-controlled Congress and they won't approve anything that he'd like to do. His myopic focus on the border